In this video, we're going to create an interacting script for our game. We're going to put it on a player and let the player interact with the objects that they're looking at by pressing a button. This video assumes you already have some sort of character controller in your game. In this video, we're going to use the character controller from the top-down movement video, but this will work with any character controller that you have. Although it will work best with the character controller that uses the input system. So let's go ahead, and first thing we should do is put in a character in our game. I have a scene here called level 1. You can obviously call your scene whatever you want, but whatever scene is necessary. I'm going to go ahead and click plus, 2D object, sprites, capsule, and make our character here. I already have some scripts and rename the guy to player. I already have some scripts that I'm going to add, but a player should probably have a box collider 2D and a rigid body 2D. As a recap, the box collider 2D adds collision and rigid body 2D adds physics. Let's look at some of the rigid body settings real quick. We have body type, which can be dynamic, kinematic, or static. Only one we're really going to use is dynamic because that's what gives us the physics that we're aiming for. If you're curious about the other ones, you can kind of look into those. We also have material. You can create what's called a physics material if you want to create more customizable settings like a bounciness or friction for your object. Simulated says whether or not it's currently in the simulation. If this is unchecked, it won't be doing anything. We're going to skip the auto mass one. Mass will affect how hard it is to move an object. So for example, an object with a high mass will be hard to push. You'll need more force to do so. Linear damping controls how quickly your character slows down. So for example, it basically recreates like an air resistance effect. Like if I push something with 0 linear damping, it's going to move forever. If I push something with 1 linear damping, air resistance is going to slow it down. Angular damping is the same thing, but it's rotation. Gravity scale is how fast the character falls with gravity. 0 would be no gravity, -1 would be moving up. We're going to do 0 because this is a top down. Then collision detection. We're not going to look at the rest of these except for constraints. We almost always want to freeze rotation Z because that stops it from like bumping into things and rotating. Okay, have a simple player. I'm going to throw on the player input component and the top-down movement component. And then in the player input, I'm going to click behavior and change from send messages to invoke Unity events, which will allow us to, after we reassign our action map for some reason, open up the events toggle and the player toggle and assign our events. The reason I'm moving through this part so quickly is because, again, I assume you already have a working player, so this is kind of just recap. If you don't have a working player, please watch the top-down movement video. I'm not going to touch camera or anything. If I play the game now, this should allow our player to move up, down, left, right. Okay, we have a starting point now, and they should be able to run too. Okay, let's work on that interact script. We're going to make a decoupled interact script that uses Unity events. What I mean by that is there's a lot of things that can happen when you interact with an object in a game. Maybe it triggers dialogue. Maybe it puts something in your inventory. Maybe it does this. Maybe it does that. We're going to create an interact script that can do anything by making it very, very generic. We make generic things in this class a lot because you never want to do the same thing twice. There's two ways to add a script to this object. We can either click add component and type in the name of the script we want to create, or you can right click in our assets folder and click create mono behavior script. This one is the better option because you can control exactly what folder it goes into immediately versus if I create it with the add component menu here, it's going to automatically just put it in my assets folder and I'll have to manually move it over to another folder, and moving things can sometimes get really messy. So if you have a well-organized project, you should have a scripts folder. If you have a better organized project, you should have different folders for each member of your team. Let's go into that scripts folder and let's right click and then create mono behavior script, and we'll call it interact. Now, we're actually going to make another script too, because how our interact script is going to work is the player is going to have a script that allows it to interact with things, and then we're going to have another script called interactable, and anything with the interactable script can be interacted with by something that has the interact script, for example, a player. let's just focus on the interact script for now. On our player here, go ahead and add by dragging on the interact script, not the interactable script, the interact script. Once the interact script is on the player, we're going to open it up and we're going to start writing some code. We're going to make this code compatible with the input system. To do that, we're going to get rid of void start and update, because we don't need either of those. We're going to create a public void called interact. So we can't just call it interact, because you actually can't make a void that has the same name as the whole class itself, even though interact would be the perfect name. So I'm just going to say interact with. It's kind of a bad name, but whatever. A void or a function or a method allows us to throw a bunch of code in between these curly brackets, and it will happen whenever we tell it to. In this case, if we write the word interact with again in our code and use the right syntax, whatever code we put in here will be executed or ran. By default, we have a start and an update function. Any code you put in the start function will automatically be called as soon as the game runs, and any code you put in the update function will automatically run every frame. The start function is good for setting things up like positions and health and stuff like that, and update is good for things that should happen every frame, like updating physics, updating collisions, stuff like that. In our public void interact with script, what we want to do is we want to do something called a BoxCast. We're going to draw a box on a given part of the screen, and the game is going to tell us if the box hit anything with a collider. If it did, it's going to tell us what it hit. So to do this, we're going to type in physics2d.boxcast. And then in parentheses, we have settings for the BoxCast. We have an origin, a size, an angle, and a direction. For the origin, if we type in transform.position, what that does is it gives us the position of the thing that has the script on it, which in this case is the player. So it's going to draw a box at the player's position. The size here, let's just say new vector2, which lets us create a float with an x and a y value. A float is like a decimal point number. So we can say one decimal point number that represents the x, which in this case is width, and another decimal point number that represents our y, which in this case is our height. We'll say 1.5f, because floats always need f at the end, and 1.5f. After this, we need an angle. We'll say 0, and a direction, we'll say vector2.0. Now, whenever we run this code, our BoxCast will run, but it's not doing anything yet. It's not going to automatically just magically work. We got to tell it what to do. First though, really quick, to make this function compatible with the input system, you have to change inside the parentheses to say input action dot callback context ctx. What this does is it gives the function a parameter. In this case, the type is input action callback context, and the name is ctx. This gives us information about the input that was performed. For example, we can see when the input was started, or if it was started. We can see when the input was started with time. We can see the duration for how long it was held down for. We can see, we can read some value from the input, which is very important when doing like movement stuff. We don't really need to do much with this except for the fact that this function, when we put it in the input system, is going to run both when the input is pressed and released, which we don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a line of code that says if the button was released, just forget about everything. To do that, we're going to say if ctx.readValue float is equal to 0, then return. What this does is it says read the button press and see if there's a float value like that we can read. In this case, there is. The float value represents how much the button's being pressed. If this was an analog button, 0 would be you're not pressing it at all. 1 would be you're pressing it all the way down, and like a 0.5 would be like you're halfway pressing it. 0.2 is like you're 2/5 the way pressing it, or 2/10, whatever. So in any case, 0 always means you're not pressing it, and 1 means you are pressing it. What return does is it says, forget about everything else after the function. We're just going to exit immediately and then stop. So if we're releasing the button, then stop and don't do anything afterwards, what this says. Let's go back to our script, Unity real quick. We're going to plug this function into our player's input system so it'll work. So click on your player object. In the player input component, click events and then player. And we're going to see if the input system has one called interact already. It does right here. So let's click the plus button. And then what we need to do is in this none object slot, we need to drag in the interact script we created and put the code in. And then where it says no function, we need to change it to interact with the function we created. You'll see it's separated from everything else because we gave it that input. See how it says dynamic callback context? This is what passes through the information about the button press. Our player can now do 3 different things. They can move, interact with an object, and they can run. Let's see if this works. The BoxCast doesn't do anything yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a debug.log at the front. A debug.log lets us print any message to the console window here. By default, Unity prints a lot of things to the console, like errors and stuff like that. We're going to print our own custom message. In our code, we're going to say interacted. And this debug log will let us put that there. If you want to log something with more information, you can actually do log error or log warning or log exception. There's actually a lot. Log assertion. There's a bunch of different variations of the log function based on what you're trying to log. Maybe you do want to log some sort of warning to the player, or user, who's writing the code. In this case, we just want to write the message, but there's plenty of reasons why you might want to log a warning or an error instead. This code is plugged in and saved. Let's see if it works. I'm not sure what the interact key is by default. It's probably like E. Yeah. So I press E and you notice it says interacted in the console here. That's how you know that our function's working, even though we can't test it very much right now. Let's stop the game and let's finish this BoxCast so that we can actually see like what we hit. Actually, first, let's put something for us to hit. In our game, let's do plus 2D object sprites. We'll do a isometric diamond. Just switch things up. Now, in order for this thing to be hit by our BoxCast, we need to give it some sort of collider. So we're gonna give it a box collider 2D. That's perfect. Okay, now we're gonna use something called layers. We want a layer for all of our interactable objects, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna say when the player presses interact button, only check for things that can be interacted with. We don't want it to bother looking, when it does the BoxCast, we don't want it to bother trying to interact with things that can't even be interacted with. So to do that, we're gonna put things on a different layer. With the isometric diamond or whatever you have selected, click layer default, and then click add layer. We're gonna create a new layer in here called interactable. Also, this version of Unity that I'm using is a really weird, like the UI here is completely broken. Yours hopefully works just fine. Now, this doesn't automatically put the layer on the thing, even though we were just in the layer menu. You actually have to click back on the object and then assign the layer again. This is good. We have a box collider, we have an interactable layer. Now we can actually write some code that'll see what we hit. Because our BoxCast code, it BoxCasts, but doesn't do anything with the BoxCast. To actually do something with the BoxCast, we need to hold the information from our BoxCast in a variable that we can then read and manipulate. So before physics 2D BoxCast, we're going to type in raycast hit 2D and say hit equals. This is going to create a variable called hit that's going to store all the information from this BoxCast. Then we can get something from it. What we're going to do is this debug log interacted thing, we're going to hold down Alt and move it down. Oopsies, that was too much. We're going to hold down Alt and move it down. Oh, that didn't work. Okay. And instead of just saying interacted, we want to say what we interacted with. So we're going to delete that, and inside the parentheses instead say hit.collider.gameObject.name, which is a lot, but hit is the variable that we got from our BoxCast that tells us what we hit. Collider is the collider that we hit because this will only hit things with a collider. GameObject is the game object that has the collider, in this case hopefully our diamond, and then name is the name of that game object, which is isometric diamond. Let's run the game real quick and see what happens. If I press the interact button right now, it says player. If I move closer to the diamond, it still says player. Even though player isn't on the interactable layer, it's still hitting the player because we didn't tell it yet about that interactable layer. So let's add a little thing real quick. After the vector2.0 here, we're going to do a comma, and then the next parameter is distance. We'll just say 0. The next parameter is layer mask. To set the layer mask to our interactable layer, we can say layer mask dot we can say layer mask dot name to layer in parentheses quotation marks, write the name of our layer, letter by letter. It's got to be the exact same, capital I and everything. So now it should only hit things on the interactable layer. Let's try it now. If I walk towards the diamond and press E now, we get a little exception. Interact with 13. Okay, so the issue is that this line of code assumes we hit something. If we didn't actually hit anything, because apparently we didn't get close enough, it's going to freak out. So let's make all of our code after the hit say, well, only even try to run this code if you actually hit something. To do that, we're going to say if hit and then add curly brackets. And then we're going to move all of our code from then inside of this if statement. This if statement says only run the code inside the curly brackets if this thing is true. And a raycast hit 2D is true if it hits something. Now, I'm having a hard time interacting with this object here because sizes and stuff like that, I can't actually even tell how big my collider is. I set the box's size to 1.5f, 1.5f, which is, I think, about that big, but I can't really tell. So we're going to use something called a gizmo to debug this. Under your public void interact with, type in on draw and take the suggestion that says on draw gizmos. Here we can write gizmo code that'll draw things to the screen. It basically lets us visualize shapes, which is very useful for things like a BoxCast that happen like invisibly. To do this, we're going to write gizmos.wireCube, draw wire cube, and in parentheses, the first setting is the center and then the size. If you hover over the BoxCast, we'll see the first two settings were the origin and the size. So we can actually just copy those and paste them into here to draw the wire cube with the same position and size as our BoxCast, which will let us kind of visualize it a little bit and make it easier for us to see what's going on. Okay, let's try walking up to the guy now that we can actually see this box around the player. Notice when I go in the game view, it disappears immediately. Just click the gizmos button at the top right. Which is, there we go. Let's E now. Click button. So it's not interacting with the diamond. Let's debug this a little bit. Our box slider 2D here is set. It's on the interactable layer, and it's definitely overlapping with it. Let's, it's definitely running the code. This is the part, I think it's the distance. I think the distance being 0, I don't think it likes that, which is kind of annoying, but whatever. Let's see if that was it. I think it was it in the other video. Let's run the game real quick. BoxCast stuff and CircleCast stuff always has little like random things you don't know about. Okay, pressing E and it's still not interacting with it. That's fine. We're going to move on to the next part of the video for now. We'll come back. It's probably going to magically work. Well, spoiler alert, nothing ever magically works. But what we're going to do is we're going to make it so we can... well, the next thing is I'm a little annoyed by the fact that our size variable here is like hard-coded in. If we want to change the size, which I think might actually be causing our issue here, we have to change it here and recompile the code, which is not fun. And if our layer mask changes, it's also not fun, which also could be part of the problem. So what we're going to do is make a couple of variables here that we can use to set our size of our BoxCast and the layer that we can interact with. Right here, what we're going to do is we're going to say public vector2 box size, and then public layer mask box layer. What this lets us do is we can replace all of our vector 2s that represent the size with the word box size now. And you can replace this layer mask.name to layer that represents our layer and change it to box layer. What this lets us do is, since these are public, we can basically, these are settings now. If we go back to Unity and I click on the player, you'll see two things got added. Box size and box layer, which is currently set to nothing. So let's change it to interactable. And then box size, as we change it, you'll see that the box size on the player changes. Let's make it fairly big like that. Let's see what happens. Now we have a really big box. If I walk near the diamond and press E, it correctly printed the message to the console. So one of those two things was the issue before. That's kind of what I thought. Moral of the story, always make your public variables public so that you can edit them in the inspector. It'll cause fix a lot of your issues. Okay. We can now successfully print a message when we interact with something. How exciting. Let's get the interactable script working now so that we can get our interactions in the game. Let's get rid of this debug log. We don't want it anymore. We're not using it. And let's look at our interactable script. Our interactable script is going to be very, very simple. Get rid of void start and void update. All we're going to do is type in public Unity event, take this suggestion that says Unity engine.events, and then call it on interact. And that's it for the script. It's done. Let's go back to Unity. What we're going to do is on our isometric diamond here, we're going to hit add component and look for our interactable script. As a recap, our player has the interact script, and the hello, it broke. That is weird. My Unity thing, I might have to refresh it. Oh my gosh. That is totally fun and a great timing. Let me try. I fixed it, thank goodness. Okay, so player here, interact script, isometric diamond, interactable script. You'll see a little drop down thingy here called on interact. This is the Unity event we just created. A Unity event allows us to hit this plus button here and drag in any number of like actions or variables or functions or whatever, and we can invoke them all at the same time. To show what I mean, let's take the sprite renderer and drag it in. And when it says no function, click sprite renderer. We have all these settings here we can change when the Unity event goes off. Let's try the sprite setting here. Where it says none sprite, we can now select a new sprite. Let's do the gray one that says background. Let's hit the plus button again, and then let's select box slider 2D this time. And where it says bool is trigger, let's make it true. So it'll make this a trigger collider. These two functions will go off when the on interact function or event is invoked. So now we need to actually invoke this with the code. So back to our interact script here, in our if hit here, we want to say, see if the thing we hit has an interactable script. And if it does, find the onInteract variable and invoke it. So do that here where it says if hit, we're going to say and, because we want to say if we hit something and that thing has the script. So we're going to say two and signs and then say hit.collider.try get component in parentheses out interactable. What try get component does is you put in the word out and then a component name and then a variable like to reference it with, and it will say this is true if it has that script on it, and then you can put it in an if statement and start using the script. If it's false, the if statement won't even run, so it can just ignore it. If you've used get component, it makes a little more sense. If you watch the other video, I did a little bit more in-depth explanation, but basically we can use the interactable script that's on the thing that we hit. Inside here, we're just going to say interactable dot on interact dot invoke. And now it'll take the onInteract, wherever we put in there, in this case, these random two like things, and it will invoke those whenever we interact with it. Let's play the game, try it out. Oh, broke again. Anyways, walk into it and press E. The sprite changed and it became a trigger collider, which means the interaction worked. Now we have successful interactable and interact scripts that will be very, very versatile. We can use these to interact with things like dialog boxes. We can interact with something that would give us an item. We can interact with something that would take us to a different level, stuff like that. This very generic coding is the way we want to go all the time because it makes our lives very, very easy down the line. Hope this video was educational, especially if you already knew Unity stuff. I feel like there's a lot of helpful stuff in this video that you might not know. And I will catch you in the next one. Thank you.